one of my daughters jokingly accused me of being just like Grandma. She didn't mean it in a negative way, and I mostly took it as a compliment. My mother is a wonderful woman with many admirable qualities and characteristics. As I get older, I do find myself embodying some of the words and mannerisms of my mother and grandmother. Just by virtue of spending large portions of my lifetime in their presence, I've absorbed some of their priorities and habits in how they engage and move throughout the world. For other things, though, I intentionally sought out their expertise. Whether it was writing poetry or baking bread, they possessed a skill I aspired to master, and so I placed myself directly under their guidance and direction with the goal of learning from their expertise. Sometimes learning takes place in our minds by reading, study, and memorization. That's head knowledge. Those of you in school can relate because most tests take place in a classroom at a desk and require the student to use what information is stored in their brains to demonstrate mastery of a topic. Another way to acquire knowledge is experiential. This knowledge results in a skill that is demonstrated with our bodies. Playing a piano, changing the oil in a car, or knitting a sweater. All of these skills require physical practice. We might call it a kind of body knowledge gained by doing. For example, if a surgeon is going to operate on me, I sincerely hope she has practical experience and hasn't only read a textbook on how to perform surgery. Both informational and experiential ways of acquiring knowledge are effective means of personal and professional growth. Speaking of which, in a few months, I will have the opportunity to start putting into practice all of the head knowledge I've learned in my deacon classes so far. I theoretically know what a deacon does and says during a worship service, and I can tell you about it with some accuracy, but soon I will be invited to transform that head knowledge into an active practice. I expect there will be important aspects to the role of deacon that I had no idea about until I learned to do them, because some things are learned only by doing. What about you? Maybe you're not learning how to be a deacon, but we all learn by a combination of osmosis and intention. What have you learned, and how have you learned it? Do you find yourself using certain phrases? What about your reactions and responses, and the ideas and perspectives you espouse? What do all these things tell you about the environments you've spent time in? Who do you learn from, embody, and copy, either intentionally or unintentionally? Were your teachers someone you respected and trust? Maybe it's a social media influencer or a character from a movie or a TV show. Perhaps it's a politician or an author or a talk show host or a podcast. There are many ways to learn lots of things, from how to tie your shoes to the use of honest business practices. We are being influenced and formed every day. In the Bible, the process of complete whole body and mind learning is called discipleship. Jesus taught his disciples ideas and concepts to expand their thinking, and he demonstrated actions and habits for them to employ as they engaged the world. Jesus' disciples learned both ways, by osmosis from being in Jesus' presence and by his direct instruction. A modern-day word for disciple is apprentice. This discussion of embodied learning reminds me of my husband's first career. He was initially an apprentice carpenter, and then, over time, earned the title of journeyman carpenter. A journeyman carpenter is the term used for someone who can walk onto a job site and do anything that might need to be done. This doesn't happen just by studying blueprints and textbooks, though that is necessary and does help. This kind of expertise must be achieved by receiving ongoing guidance and direction from an expert, attempting to copy them, making mistakes, receiving feedback, and honing skills over many, many hours. This requires focused attention on imitating the expert until the apprentice transforms from an ignorant, clumsy beginner into a competent, skillful tradesman. A wise apprentice directs their attention toward the teacher and learns to anticipate what comes next. They're ready to hand a tool or take notes. They look at what's coming and learn to become of the same mind as their teacher, so they work together easily, eventually without the need for words. Have you ever shared this kind of close working relationship with someone? There's nothing like it. Someone who is well-trained no longer needs to spend minutes in thought considering what to do next. It comes naturally because they've spent so much time in practice. This is how we can join God in the work that we are called to do. As we are apprentices of Jesus, studying his life and words with the intention to emulate them, we too can have that kind of relational experience with God. We too can anticipate how God is working already wherever we are and instinctively join in that work. God's Spirit within us is always at the ready, speaking to us, guiding our steps, and encouraging us when we make mistakes. The people we surround ourselves with matter too. Who we spend time with and what we allow to influence our thoughts and feelings is tremendously important in building a character that is becoming more like Christ. We must choose wisely and be intentional. Otherwise, we may find ourselves becoming someone we'd rather not be, someone who is not effective in God's work in the world. Who have been the journeyman carpenters of your spiritual life's formation? What circumstances and people have directed the formation of your character? The reading we heard from 2 Thessalonians tells us about a group of believers who were living in idleness, not according to the tradition that they received. Who knows how or why they decided that the tradition was no longer something they wanted to emulate. Maybe it no longer suited them. Maybe they were told it didn't really matter. Maybe their role models failed, or maybe they lacked teachers. Paul's words are blunt. He warns to keep away from such people and commands that anyone unwilling to work should not eat. However, theologian Michael Fitzpatrick draws our attention to an important distinction. Paul says, anyone unwilling to work. He's not talking about people who don't or can't work for whatever reason. He's talking about people who are able but unwilling. Paul addresses the motivation of their hearts, and this is an indication of character. Paul reminds his fellow believers that he taught them by his own example. He was able and willing to work, even though he could have relied on the local church to support and provide for him. He gave them an example to imitate because he knew it would be helpful for them to see someone practicing a mature, faithful lifestyle. The recipients of the letter were invited to be Paul's apprentices, and he encouraged them to not just be willing to do the work God had called them to, but also to do it. The goal is for us to have the character of someone who is mature in their faith, not self-focused or a burden to others because we are unwilling to work in the ways we are able to and called to. Speaking of willingness to work and eating, I recall an instance of my own character growth. My mother required her children to clean up the kitchen after meals. The 4 of us were on weekly rotations, responsible for clearing the table and washing the dishes after dinner each night. I did so somewhat resentfully as a teenager, often complaining and muttering under my breath, wishing I could do the things I preferred to do instead. Cleaning up and doing dishes was boring. A decade or so later, I found myself back at my mother's kitchen sink. This time, though, I was joyful and grateful, happy to volunteer to serve my mother and do the dishes as a way to say thank you for the meal she had prepared for my growing family to enjoy. My perspective changed with my life experience. I had matured, allowing circumstances to influence me to be less self-focused. I found myself not only applying my mother's wisdom to the manner in which I did the dishes. She taught me the importance of conserving water in our drought-prone state, but I also imitated her acts of selfless service, as she had patiently demonstrated with her life over the years that I lived in her home. My experience had taught my inner and outer self to do what was best because it was good and right, to serve others without complaining, and to be grateful instead of selfishly wishing I didn't have to clean up after myself. Like my wise mother, Paul was concerned about the character of those he taught, not just whether or not they did the right thing. He encouraged direct consequences for self-centered living, hoping that good character would result and benefit the whole of the church. Who we watch or look at for direction matters. In the gospel reading, Jesus reminds his disciples to focus on him amidst trials and terrifying circumstances. He warns of people who will try to impress them and claim to be followers of God, but are not. Jesus says, do not go after them. He assures his disciples that in their time of need, he will give them words and wisdom. Jesus, the expert, promises his disciples, his apprentices, that God will provide what people cannot. He warns them not to be led astray or tricked by leaders who seem honorable and godly and even claim to be followers of Jesus. I know from personal experience that it is very tempting to make a fellow human being my idol. Jesus knows our tendency to deceive ourselves and fall for the believable facades that others present. Ultimately, whoever we find ourselves looking up to, whatever influences we seek and absorb, may we be reminded to look at the resulting fruit. Is it love, joy, peace? Whether it's the Apostle Paul or any other person, let's be discerning who we choose to be our teachers, ever returning to Jesus' standards of living lives of justice and peace. After we have reviewed our influences and are surrounded by wise and godly counselors, what then? Paul encourages the church to not be weary in doing what is right. What is the right work God has invited us to do? How might we, as apprentices of Jesus, do that work joyfully, maturing in our faith as we invite others to join us? A Christ-centered life has an irresistibly positive effect on everyone around. Let's unite in our mission, and together we can anticipate what's to come and be well prepared for wherever God leads. Amen.